All right, so I've been watching this huge dust up between, well, essentially it's the media perpetuating this dust up of Zelensky and Trump, or the administration, let's put it that way. They're trying to lift Zelensky up as some type of a hero, and just like with the Canadian thing, where they're the 51st state garbage that's manufactured by the media in order to get Canadians to get their feathers ruffled and start posting crap on Facebook, dogging Americans, and then Americans doing the same thing in return. They tried to divide the United States up, and now the media is trying to divide the world, create enemies of our allies. They say that Trump is responsible for this, but the reality is that it's the media that is trying to cut this country off from its allies, at least from the people. The leadership is already, a part of the global, conglomerate of people that are aligned financially. You've got Trudeau, who's acting like a dictator in his own country. And sure, there's going to be a Canadian you could put on the media saying, "Oh, we love Trudeau," but the reality is that there's a lot of people that don't support him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be offering to step down. The same thing in Germany, where those people are getting really tired of seeing the stormtroopers that are knocking on people's doors and arresting people for their speech. I mean, that's just ridiculous. You know, uh, the biggest issue that I have with all of this is that the media, the right and the left, to be honest with you, you got Lindsey Graham and and others within the conservative side that support sending hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine. They're like, oh, we do support Zelensky and we do support him fighting against the dictator Putin. But the reality is that we don't really have a problem with dictators. I mean, Saudi Arabia is a major offender of human rights. They kill journalists and and gay people, and they do all sorts of horrible shit. But we don't have a problem doing business with them. You know, so being a dictatorship doesn't automatically mean that you're an enemy of the United States. It's just if you're not a dictator that is doing business with us. But even then, I mean, we borrow all this money from China, and Disney and these studios that are making movies and stuff like that are walking a tightrope because they don't want to offend China because they want access to that market. You know, you've got companies like Apple that were doing business over there and making money. They don't want to step on anybody's toes. They're not going to criticize the leadership in China and cut off a massive amount of revenue or their ability to manufacture chips at, you know, really low prices. China's buying up land here. They're manipulating the media and the narratives here. So obviously they talk smack about China all the time, but the reality is that none of these congressmen and senators really want to do anything about China. You know, I don't know. Uh, Even with Russia, if you take into consideration, they always talk smack about Putin, and they don't acknowledge. Obviously, they can't because they're the bad guys. They can't acknowledge that prior to Putin coming into power, that Western influences were trying to basically divvy up the spoils of Russia. When the Soviet Union fell, it was a free for all. You had all these oligarchs and gangsters and all this shit that basically drove the country into the ground. Drove the Soviet Union into the ground. Now all vying for the spoils, sell off uranium, sell off weapon systems, stealing the cash, and the poor Russian people suffered for it. Putin came in and he put Russia back together. He, people don't give him credit for what he did. He kicked Western influences out of the country. You know, you may not like how he did it, but there's a lot of people there. You know, their population is way bigger than ours. So you may have to use some strongman tactics in order to get things back under control. I'm not going to say that's good or bad because, the standard of living in Russia is much better than it was in the past before Putin was in power. So for the Russian people, he did a good job for them. Now, how the rest of the world views him and his control over the media and things like that is kind of a hypocritical situation because you got, as a prime example, when the war in Ukraine started, Gonzalo Lira was arrested. He was released on bail, tried to escape the country, was recaptured, and died in prison. He was tortured, and prior to his death, there was a political prisoner in Russia who died. Guy wasn't a great guy, but he was, in the media they promoted him as like the second coming of Christ. And when he died of a blood clot, the media was all over it. Oh, this death is all on the hands of Putin. This is Putin's responsibility. This guy, but they didn't cover the death of Gonzalo Lira, who was an American citizen. They left that out all out of the equation. They left out the fact that they were arresting Ukrainian citizens that were trying to leave the country because they didn't want any part of the war. You know, People need to understand that this isn't, you're not supporting the Ukrainian people by sending weapons and money to the leadership that's willing to sacrifice every single one of those people for their agenda. And their agenda is to win a war that is unwinnable. Let's be honest. Biden said it clearly about like the Second Amendment. What are you going to do? You're going to defend yourself with an AR-15 against an F-16? That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to defend their country, or actually their leadership and the Western influence, with weaponry that can't stand up to a superpower. Look at the size of Ukraine. Put that over the map of the United States, and tell me that they can beat Russia. They can't. Russia's goal isn't to, have an Iraq situation where they have constant issues with terrorism and an insurgency. That's not what their agenda is. They don't want to dismantle the military. They don't want to dismantle the government. They want to keep it intact. They just want leadership that isn't going to be influenced by the West. They want to have normalized relationships with the leadership in Ukraine so that they don't have to fear that there are CIA bases and biological weapons facilities and things of that nature in their country. They don't want them to have a pact with the UN, with NATO, that requires, if those guys set off a war, for the rest of the countries to have to come to their defense because it's part of their UN, their NATO charter. They don't want that. They're trying to avoid going to World War III. And they understand that the leadership there is far removed from the actions, the consequences of their actions. And I think we need to separate. Essentially, first off, listen to the media. I encourage you to listen to the media because the media is always wrong. And if they're always wrong, all you have to do is do the opposite of what they tell you to do. Believe the opposite of what they tell you to do because it's inevitable that history is going to look at this entire situation. It's all going to get exposed for what it really is, just like in 2014, where it's USAID funds, CIA, military intelligence, Western influences were the ones that created that scenario in which the government was overthrown in the first place. How do you look at that situation and say that that country is democratic or that it's not corrupted? And you might say, well, yeah, but it was corrupted before. You had gangsters, you had, Russian oligarchs and this, that, and the other thing there. Yeah, that's true. That's always been the true nature of Ukraine. Ukraine has always been corrupted. Its leadership has always been corrupted. People that come into power there have always been gangsters. Always. But the Ukrainian people are the ones that we should be concerned about. And our influence in the region destabilizes the world. Plain and simple. The Ukrainian people themselves are not, under threat of extermination. Their national identity is not being exterminated. Even when they were under the umbrella of the Soviet Union, nobody was trying to exterminate the national identity of anybody there. Unlike what happened after 2014 when, you know, or even prior with Crimea. Those people were 90% Russian, or at least identified with being having, their national identity as Russian. They don't want to be a part of Ukraine. They wanted to be annexed by Russia. That's why it was so easy for Russia to take that. It wasn't a massive incursion. It didn't take years. It was over in a matter of friggin' months. So anyway, uh, like I said, pay attention to the media. If they tell you one thing, you can honestly believe that it's the opposite. These people are never right. And eventually, history will show that the United States under the Biden administration was wrong, just like George Bush was wrong, just like the media was wrong, just like Democrats and Republicans were all wrong on the war in Iraq. We need to stop facilitating the meat grinder that's killing Ukrainian people. You can't call Putin a dictator and ignore the journalists that are being murdered, the citizens that are being rounded up and forced to die in a war that they don't want to be a part of. You wouldn't have to extradite people from other countries back to Ukraine to fight in a war that was just. You know, Peace has to be the ultimate goal, and that's never going to happen with the leadership that's in power. They've been emboldened, and now the Europeans are saying they're going to send, the French and the UK are talking about putting troops on the ground. The smartest thing for us to do is stop funding and pull ourselves out of NATO. That's the only way that these people are going to, because what they're trying to do essentially is create a circumstance in which, by NATO charter, we're forced to respond to them being attacked by Russia. When they are the aggressors, they are putting their troops into an engagement that they don't have any right to be a part of. They can say, well, it's the moral imperative, but the reality is that there's no moral imperative in creating a scenario in which, two neighboring countries are working shit out for themselves. You know, have elections. If they have elections, Zelensky will lose, and the new leadership will end that war the next day. That's why Zelensky doesn't want to have elections. Because he doesn't want the people to have a choice in whether they fight this losing war or not. You know, you can go onto YouTube for yourself and you can look at the videos of people being dragged off the streets. Soldiers beating other soldiers in the barracks because they aren't complying. They aren't, they don't want to go and die. You know, so I implore you to do your own research. Don't let people manipulate you into thinking one way or the other. Me included. This is my opinion, and you know, if you enjoy the content, great. If you don't enjoy the content, great. I welcome any comments. This is all about having a conversation. All these videos that I'm going to be posting are just about essentially stirring the pot a bit, getting people to think for themselves. Don't think what I want you to think. Think for yourself. I know that it's difficult because even doing a Google search, trying to find historical precedents or just anything is swayed and slanted. And if you really start to look, you're going to see how bad it really is. Wikipedia in particular. Go on to Wikipedia and do a search of Donald Trump and then do a search of Bill Clinton. And you're not going to find anything derogatory on Bill Clinton other than his 18-month affair with Monica Lewinsky. But if you go on to Trump's page on Wikipedia, you're going to see all sorts of crap that they would bring up, and clearly there was issues during the Clinton administration that are not addressed on the Wikipedia page. It's crazy. Even just trying to Google stuff nowadays, it's been so scrubbed, and manipulated. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, if you go on to Google and you search Honda recalls, you're not going to find a bunch of stuff on how terrible Chevys are. But if you Google search Ukraine and corruption or whatever, you're going to find some articles, but it's always going to refer back to Putin bad, just like it always refers to Trump bad. You don't find Biden bad, and in spite of the fact that Biden has done a lot of things to this country, destabilized the. I mean, look at all the crap that went down. Under Biden, you didn't see a bunch of, you had January 6th, isolated incident. You didn't have libertarians and Republicans and independents out on the streets, like rabid animals. But you see that now, and you have to ask yourself, who's funding it? Who's promoting it? It's organized. This is not, organic. It really isn't. It's intentional. The media is there because they know that they're going to be there, and they're there specifically to push, just like they did during the first Trump administration, that the world is going to hell in a handbasket. The reality is that they are trying their damnedest to keep Donald Trump from accomplishing anything because they don't want the world to change. They want it to remain the same. They want to be able to unilaterally declare somebody an enemy and destabilize their countries, hurt their people. Look at Haiti. What have we done for Haiti? We've hurt them so much with the Clinton, initiative and Soros and Bill Gates. The same thing with Africa. It's just ridiculous what we've done through some of these NGOs and these foundations that just essentially ruin people's lives, entire countries' lives, for God's sakes. The leader of Haiti starts to talk to China and Russia and ends up getting assassinated immediately. This is ridiculous. Take a look around the world today, and we've got dictators as friends. So to suggest that normalizing relationships with superpowers, I mean, think about that. That's so ridiculous. Align yourself with this tiny country, Ukraine, and its leader over two major superpowers. Two countries that were instrumental in defeating the Germans in World War II along with us. The rest of these people that are aligning themselves with Ukraine, who I might remind you was part of the Allied or the Axis, Britain's never been a friend to the United States. I mean, Tony Blair was along for the ride with the Bush administration, wreaking havoc across, the Middle East, destabilizing the world, lying to the American public, sacrificing American troops, sacrificing British troops. I just hope people will pay attention to the details. And like I said, feel free to comment.